Hello and welcome back to Political Psych with Abby. I'm Abby, and this is genopolitics. Genopolitics is a fantastically sinister and important sounding word, meaning the study of the genetic basis for political behavior and attitudes. I'd like to thank Sonny Perwanto for suggesting this topic. Sorry if I just mispronounced your name. If you've got a political psychology question and are willing to risk me mispronouncing your name, comment it below and I might make a video about it. Whether that's an offer or a threat, you can decide yourself. This video will be referring back to my video on attitudes a lot, but you don't have to watch that first. I just suggest watching both at some point, as both videos really add something to each other, and I kind of feel like neither is complete without the other. So, can politics be genetic? The short answer to this question is yes. The long answer to this question will be the rest of the video. First, we've got to talk about twins for a bit and how incredibly useful they are to science. Identical twins raised in the same home have fairly similar life experiences and the same DNA. Fraternal twins, on the other hand, have similar life experiences, but are no more genetically related than siblings. This means that if something like, say, political ideology is more similar among identical twins than fraternal twins, it is probably genetic. And what do you know? A lot of political traits are more similar for sets of identical twins than for sets of fraternal twins. These traits include views on specific issues, overall political orientation, and right-wing authoritarianism. Unfortunately, how much of this is affected by not controlling for which twin is good and which twin is evil has yet to be established, and won't ever be if my grant proposals keep getting turned down. According to Chikoka and Don't, genetic factors usually account for between 35 and 65% of variance in people's politics, although estimates vary. Estimates vary is going to be a running theme here. Unsurprisingly, the influence of genetics varies a lot depending on which aspect of someone's politics you are talking about. Still, I find it's very important for me to tell you that I haven't seen anything indicating genes explain 100% of even one individual aspect of someone's politics. Honestly, if genes determined all of a person's politics, having a YouTube channel talking about politics would be pretty pointless. Except monetarily, and if I was doing this for money, I would have stopped by now. Your genes don't choose your politics, you do. Although your genes often affect your choices, environmental factors also play a role. And that's without falling down the rabbit hole of discussing free will. Back to what genes do influence. They likely influence how involved someone is with politics and how strong and extreme their attitudes may be. However, it is also very important to keep in mind which political factors may not be significantly genetically influenced. Egalitarianism and its near direct inverse social dominance orientation, a belief that the world ought to be hierarchical, are political attributes that may or may not be strongly genetic. Different studies have come to different conclusions, and there does not yet seem to be an academic consensus. That's very inconvenient for me. How dare they? If you're interested in learning more about social dominance orientation, I talk a lot more about it in my video on attitudes. Rather strangely, another one of these possibly not very genetic political attributes is political party identification. One would expect that since ideology is fairly genetic, identifying with a political party would be too. Still, the scientific evidence for genes influencing which political party someone associates with is very mixed, with some studies finding large genetic effects and others not doing so. Interestingly, one study from Australia found that genetic effects of party identification were explained by genetic effects on attitudes towards socialism. Even stranger is that while identifying with a particular party, like Democrats or Republicans, may not be genetic, identifying with a party at all may be. Dawes and Fowler found that having two A2 genes on the DRD2 gene made someone more likely to identify with the political party than someone with fewer A2 genes. This gene pattern relates to social attachments and cognitive attributes. Of course, belonging to particular political parties does often run in families. Now, that's probably mostly environmental rather than genetic. Back to the DRD2 gene. So basically, in my own extremely not a geneticist words, Gene thing influences social and cognitive thing influences tendency to join a political party. Finding specific genes like this that influence specific political attributes is actually pretty rare, but it is expected more relationships like this one may be found, although exact one-to-one parallels of genes to political traits are not expected in all cases. That's super interesting and important, if mildly inconvenient for political psychologists who got into the field, partially because they weren't great at the biology end of psychology. So now that we have established that genetics can influence politics, how might they do so? Well, usually it's that genetics influence something about us, and then that influences something political, like I was talking about with the DRD2 gene and joining a party. While politics changes on a much faster timescale than genetics, our political attitudes still relate to issues of reproduction and survival that existed in ancient times. Our politics might be different, but our lives are still largely governed by the same interpersonal traits, and those traits have had loads of time to evolve. So, yep, there is a chance that your neighbor thinks that the moon landing was fake because of something that happened to our genetic ancestors 100,000 years ago. What that trait in the middle between genetics and politics is depends a lot on what aspect of someone's politics we're talking about. So let's run through some examples. Genetics seem to shape our values, and our values shape our politics. For more on that, see my video on attitudes. Unfortunately, if there's a conclusive scientific line between a value and an attitude, I have yet to find it. What seems to be the case is that attitudes are smaller outgrowths from larger values. Our genes also likely shape our emotional experience of the world, which in turn can shape our politics. Oxley et al. Found that those with measurably lower physical sensitivities to sudden noises and threatening visual images were more likely to hold a wide variety of more liberal positions, like supporting foreign aid, liberal immigration policies, pacifism, and gun control. Those more sensitive were more likely to hold conservative positions, like favoring defense spending, capital punishment, patriotism, and the Iraq War. This does sort of line up with a lot of research within political psychology, indicating that conservatives tend to experience the world as a much scarier place. Coming from a left-wing perspective myself, understanding that fear has been really helpful. Importantly, you can understand and even have compassion for that fear without excusing evil motivated by fear. Knowing about this also makes it easier to keep a lookout for those who prey on fear for their own gain. Also importantly, you can definitely be someone who startles and gets scared easily without being right-wing. I, for one, once had a week of nightmares after listening to a description of The Shining on NPR. And I'm definitely not a right-winger. You could probably guess that based off of me listening to NPR. In my video on political attitudes, I talk a bunch about the influence of personality and intelligence on politics, so I won't go into too much detail about that here. What's important for this video is to know that both personality and intelligence are influenced by, but not wholly controlled by, genetics, meaning that they can act as a mechanism for genetics to influence politics. One important mechanism that may work in concert with many of these other mechanisms is the way that our genetics shape the experiences we have and seek out. Then those experiences shape us and our politics, magnifying the effects of small genetic differences. However, it's important to note that while these behavioral tendencies can be genetic, they can also be shaped by other things, including one's politics, so the relationship does not necessarily go only one way. My God, why is so much of psychology just ever more complicated and disputed flowcharts? So now, why did I make this video? Is it to tell you to just leave people alone because their politics are genetic and unchangeable and therefore need to be tolerated? Yes. Wait, no, hell no. What I mean to say is that we're all starting from different places politically, even at birth, but that we can still shape our own politics and have them shaped by others. It is still worth trying to convince people, but some people may require more effort or different tactics. To quote an article by Olson, Vernon, Harris, and Lang, to be sure, the environment is necessary for the development of attitudes, but the hypothesis that attitudes are learned is not incompatible with the notion that biological and genetic factors also influence attitudes. That is, there is a second necessary component to the development of attitudes, the biological organism, within which events are subjectively experienced and mnemonically recorded. Biological factors presumably mediate and moderate the impact of personal experience, in that events are experienced through our sensory structures and memories, and evaluations are stored in our brains. To turn that into non-science speak, the point is that political experience happens within and to a human body, primarily the brain, and that body and brain will be shaped by our genetics. I'll admit that for someone like me who likes to believe in the inherent goodness of people, the fact that some people are more genetically prone to good or bad politics can be uncomfortable. However, the fact that our genetics are tied to our politics points to our lengthy evolutionary history as a cooperative and social species. For me, at least, that provides some hope. What is also important is that genetics only indicate propensity for certain political traits, and that knowing about this propensity can help us make a better world. Understanding genopolitics has the potential to be a powerful political tool, especially in the future as more is learned about it. Currently, the main usefulness of genopolitics from an activist perspective is the knowledge that many differences of opinion do not originate solely from life experience. Obviously, you can't exactly do an in-depth genopolitics evaluation on everyone you are trying to persuade or communicate with. DNA sequencing isn't that fast or public yet, thank God. And most people don't even have twins you can compare them to, much to the dismay of psychologists. Importantly, while we can use genopolitics to change people's minds for good, and the potential to do so is only likely to increase, that does not mean we should change people on a genetic level in order to change their politics. Firstly, this likely would not work, or would have unintended consequences. Secondly, and more importantly, doing this would be some obviously dystopian totalitarian shit. If your ideology allows for altering people's genes so they agree with you, I, for one, don't want you gathering support even via less dystopian means. Anyway, that video went some weird places. Hopefully they were at least interesting ones. Please like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to follow me somewhere, I've got some social media. Do you have a political psychology question? Submit it in the comments. Thanks again for watching.